Welcome to the February 25th, 2025 Planning Commission meeting. I'm Blandy Miller, Chair of the Commission. As always, I ask everyone today to please be efficient in your comments and avoid redundancy so that we can hear from as many viewpoints on as many cases as possible. We start every meeting with an opportunity for the public to comment on an item not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who'd like to speak on an item not on the agenda today? Then seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. There's one item on consent today, rezoning case Z7022 at Glenwood Avenue, Lake Ann Drive, and Winchester Drive. This item originally appeared on our agenda around 9 months ago. Since then, at the request of the applicant and neighbors, the commission has requested and City Council has granted 3 90-day extensions. At our December 10th meeting, we deferred this case to today's meeting, and today the recommended action is that we again defer this item to our March 25th meeting. Our current deadline for action is April 9th, so the deferral will not require another request for an extension. And it's my understanding that the applicant has been working diligently to accommodate neighbor requests and questions, and the delay has been caused by awaiting feedback, the necessary feedback and approvals from the local HOA, which is still forthcoming. Is there any discussion on this topic? Seeing none, I would like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda. Do I have a second? We have a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to new business, we have 4 items on the agenda. For these items, we will hear a full staff presentation and comments from the public. The first item is rezoning case Z3524 at 4409 Creedmoor Road. This case is to change approximately 4.14 acres from OX4 to CX7 with conditions. And we will turn to Matthew Clem for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning, Chair and Planning Commission. Matthew Clem, Planning and Development. So as the Chair stated, we're looking at a 4.14 acre site going from office mixed use to commercial mixed use, increasing the story height by 3 stories. And your deadline is April 26th. You can see there's a mix of zoning in the area, commercial mixed use across the street, which is around the Crabtree Valley Mall area, and then along Creedmoor Road, more commercial mixed use and office mixed use. To the northwest, we have conservation management around the Greenway corridor and some 4-story residential. A look at the site, you can see the mix of uses in the area. We are southwest of the Glenwood Avenue Creedmoor intersection. You can see the mall on the right side of the screen, Crabtree Valley Mall. From the site, you can see a small single-story development, but the site extends back into the lot. The site is adjacent to Crabtree Creek, and you can see there are jurisdictional flood areas on and adjacent to the site. An image from Creedmoor Road. And the proposed zoning conditions. So condition 1, essentially what condition 1 does is, although the zoning district is going to CX, what this condition does is caps all uses at OX and adds the overnight lodging use to the mix. Increases the height by 3 stories, and then also limits the existing, limits future office development to the existing entitlement. So the office does not change. The district is basically OX plus the overnight lodging use and additional height. And the second condition prohibits parking between the building and the street in an effort to comply with urban frontage guidance for the development. So looking at entitlements here, maximum units increase because of the additional height. Office and retail stays the same because of the zoning condition. We have a higher walk score, transit score, bike score, and transportation and job proximity indexes on the site because of its location near the regional commercial center that is Crabtree Valley Mall. A lot of jobs at the mall and other office establishments nearby. A look at the bus service in the area. It's served by the Crabtree and the Briar Creek Express. The request does add to supply. There are no subsidized units provided in the case. And of course, because it's a mixed-use district, is adding or permitting smaller lots and less expensive housing types comparatively, and of course is in walking distance with transit. So there's a lower demographic index than the city, fewer people of color and low-income populations live in the area, and fewer folks with less than a high school education. We are consistent with the future land use map because while the request is going to OX, only adding the overnight lodging use isn't a really big departure from what is envisioned in OX, also because the hotel or overnight lodging use is permitted in OX but as a special use. So establishing a hotel use in OX would require a special use permit. But in this case, what they're asking to do is increase height and permit overnight lodging outright. Consistent with the urban form map, albeit only prohibiting the parking between the building and the site, given the context of the site and the topography and the separation from this site and sites to the northeast by the creek, it seems appropriate to consider this consistent and just overall consistency with the plan. These are your policies, and your deadline is April 26th, and there are no outstanding issues.
Thank you. Moving on to the public comment portion for those in support. The applicant and those in favor have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, 434 Fayetteville Street in Raleigh, here on behalf of the applicant AGS Hotels. You may have noticed from Mr. Clem's summary that, and from the applicant name, that the request here is about constructing a hotel on the site. That's the need to just add that single use. So not a lot of issues have come up as we've been through our public outreach in this process. As you see, this area is designated for economic development. A hotel is actually a fairly large job provider, so very consistent with that, as well as with the transportation network surrounding. You also saw that a big chunk of the frontage on this site is actually occupied by the creek, and that's where it becomes difficult to fully comply with the urban frontage because you can't meet the percentages of occupation with the creek and then the driveway access as well as the building. So there's where that challenge comes up and why it was presented the way that it was. So because not very many issues have come up, I'll be available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak in support of this project? Then moving on to public comment for those in opposition. Those opposed to this case will have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Please come to the podium. And seeing none, we can bring it back to the table for any questions and comments from our commissioners. Or seeing none, I'll entertain a motion. Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
All right, regarding Z3524, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated February 25th contained in the agenda materials and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on to our next item, zoning case Z3924 at at Honeycutt Road. This case is to change approximately 14.15 acres from R1 with Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District to R6 CU with the Falls Overlay District. We will now turn to Robert Tate for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning, Commission. Robert Tate with Planning and Development. So this is rezoning request Z3924 at 8415 Honeycutt Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 14.15 acres from R1 with the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District to a conditional use R6 district retaining that overlay district. Your deadline for action is April 26th. Zoning in the area is predominantly residential. However, there are various mixed-use districts that are situated along Falls of Noose Road to the south of the site. Here's an aerial image of the site and surrounding land uses. Directly north is a church. To the east is the Bent Tree neighborhood. To the west is the Bent Tree neighborhood. To the east is Lafayette Village, and then a mix of uses along the Falls of Noose corridor. Here's another aerial image. Looking at the site, you can notice that this is largely wooded with a pretty healthy tree canopy on the site. Here's a couple of street views. The first is looking from Honeycutt Road into the site. And then the second at the bottom is a view from Chatterson Drive, which is west of the site. That's the dead-end street that abuts the property. So there are several conditions that have been proposed. The first would limit residential uses so that it does not exceed 56 units. The second would prohibit the apartment building type. Just a reminder that R6, the conventional development option, does not allow the permit the apartment building type, but the conservation development option would. But the applicant has opted to prohibit that building type altogether. The third would prohibit various uses that will otherwise be allowed in an R6 district. And then the last two, the fourth would be an exemption from UDO block perimeter and dead-end street requirements. So this would exempt the applicant from extending Chatterson Drive through the site. And the fifth condition would require construction of a 5-foot width path from Chatterson Drive to the internal network of the site. So just a quick look at what's changing. So the biggest change here would be allowing additional units up to 56, approximately 56 units would be allowed on the site, and also unlocking that townhouse building type on the site. And I would also like to note that they're keeping the Falls watershed protection overlay. So this site has a higher walk score than average. Transit data is unavailable, but there is a transit stop a little over a half a mile away from the site. A bike score higher than average, lower transportation cost index than average, which means transportation costs are higher than the city average, and then a higher job proximity than average, which means it's closer and more accessible to jobs than average. So looking at affordability, this would add to the housing supply, although this request does not include subsidized units as a form of zoning conditions. It would permit a variety of housing types, smaller units, smaller lots. Like I mentioned, it's over a half mile from a transit stop, so not within walking distance. So this area is less likely to have racial minorities compared to the citywide average, also less likely to have households with low income than the citywide average. I'd like to note that this site is also outside of corporate limits, but within our ETJ. So any extension of public utilities would require annexation, and the applicant is aware of that. So this request is inconsistent with the future land use map. The designation rural residential envisions a smaller scale and less impactful development pattern, which is largely associated and corresponds with the R1 zoning district. In this request, they are seeking the R6 district. So consistent with the comp plan overall, like I mentioned, inconsistent with the future land use map. And here are a handful of policies that support housing, housing variety, compact development. And largely this request falls in line with the guidance for the Falls Lake secondary watershed density policy. Here are a few inconsistent policies, like I cited before, inconsistency with the future land use map. So a zoning condition that would prohibit or exempt them from the UDO block perimeter standards triggered this inconsistency with policy T 2.4 road connectivity. And this site is also located in an area of known fire service consideration, so it also triggered the response time standards policy. So there are no outstanding issues at this time. Again, your deadline for action is April 26th. And just quickly, just for a reminder, because this is inconsistent with the future land use map, this would trigger an automatic comp plan amendment to amend the map from rural residential to a low-scale residential district. I believe the applicant is here and can answer any questions you have, and staff is also available.
Thank you. Moving on to public comment for those in support. The applicant and those in favor will have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Commission. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the applicant. Also with me this morning is Andrew Sandman, the applicant for this rezoning. Appreciate Robert's presentation. Want to highlight a few key points. First, property is currently zoned R1 with the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District. That's 14 large estate lots under current zoning. Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District requires 40% of the property be forested, and a maximum impervious surface limit of 30%. That includes any interior roads, any road improvements adjacent to the site. Our request is for R6 with conditions to a 4-unit per acre density, which is consistent with the Falls Watershed Area Plan density guidelines. That we are maintaining the Watershed Protection Overlay District. So it's a matter of what are we doing within that 30% impervious. 14 large estate lots or a maximum of 56 single-family homes or townhomes. Given where this property is located inside 540, across the street from Lafayette Village, Lifetime Fitness, other retail services, office services, Bentry Plaza to the south, given the transportation infrastructure in the area, our access to the Greenway system through Bentry, we think that providing additional housing here is an important piece and one that can be accomplished, again, within the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District. As I mentioned, we're adjacent to the Bentry neighborhood. In addition to the 2 required neighborhood meetings, we have also held 2 additional meetings with the Bentry neighborhood, as well as many phone calls, email exchanges, and meetings on site with those who live immediately adjacent to the site. We appreciate very much them working with us, agreeing to meet with us many times, and just keeping that line of communication open. Our largest point of discussion, as you might have seen from the engagement report, is around Chatterson Drive, which is the street that stubs into the site. At our first neighborhood meeting, where there was nearly 100 attendees, there was unanimous, I would say unanimous, sentiment of not extending Chatterson through the site because of the standard of their streets, no sidewalks, and I'm sure they will touch on kind of why that connection would be adverse to their neighborhood. So from the beginning, we have prohibited that Chatterson Drive extension through our site. In addition to meeting with the Bentry folks, we've also had meetings with transportation staff about not having that connection. And in lieu of that vehicular connection, we initially proposed a condition for a 5-foot bike ped connection from Chatterson to kind of our public street within the site, which would then connect with our sidewalks and go out to Honeycutt. Transportation had a request for actually a 10-foot multi-use path from Chatterson out to Honeycutt, and we have submitted draft conditions providing that. So while that condition is not before you, that is a condition that we have submitted to staff, providing a 10-foot multi-use path from the termination of Chatterson through our site out to Honeycutt Road. I want to mention that we've also discussed pedestrian crossing across Honeycutt, as well as trying to provide, fill in some of the gaps for sidewalks along Honeycutt Road. Those conversations are ongoing. Raleigh DOT has been talking with NC DOT, who has expressed not wanting that pedestrian crossing, unsignalized crossing at Honeycutt. And we are also working through issues with staff about that gap in the sidewalk because of existing right-of-way, implications on our impervious surface limits. But right now, we are providing for that multi-use path through the site. Robert went through our conditions, again, which were intended to address consistency with the Falls Watershed Area Plan and compatibility with the Bent Tree neighborhood. Again, we've prohibited certain non-residential uses, prohibited the apartment building type, and limited our density to 4 units per acre. In addition to the multi-use path condition that we've submitted in draft form, we have also submitted a draft condition that increases our tree conservation requirement from 10% to 15%. So under R1 zoning, 15% TCA is the requirement. And so even though we're going from R1 to R4, which would reduce our obligation to 10%, we want to honor what that current zoning requirement is of 15%. We've also proposed a draft condition to require 30% open area, so area outside of street right-of-way, outside of buildable lots that would be owned by an association, so similar to open space. Again, that's intended to address future land use map consistency, but also just compatibility and consistency with the surrounding area. Again, as Robert mentioned, we are consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. We believe we're reasonable and in the public interest as well by providing housing supply within walking distance to retail, restaurant, office, and recreation uses. Again, we understand we've provided some draft conditions which are still under staff review, but we still wanted to come here and receive any feedback from the Planning Commission as well in terms of comments, questions. So I think in order to act on those conditions, we would need to come back in 2 weeks. But again, we appreciate you hearing from us this morning, and we welcome any feedback or questions that you all may have. So, thank you.
Thanks very much. We will now move on to public comment. For anyone else in support of this project, please come to the podium and speak.
Good morning.
Introduce yourself.
I'm Chris Mango. I'm a member of the board of the Bent Tree HOA right next door to the project. So first, Attorney Birch sort of highlighted the most critical aspect of the project for us, and that is that no vehicles, that there not be a cut through to from Chatterson to Honeycutt, and that vehicles can't go through there in any way. So Chatterson is a narrow street. It's about 20 feet wide. There's pedestrians there all the time, children walking to the Middlebrook elementary school or middle school. There's bikers. There's the Greenway path connects to Chatterson. Excuse me. So there's a lot of pedestrian and bikers on that path. And it's literally impossible for 2 cars to pass at the same time with the pedestrians on the street. You have to wait and pull over. There's also landscaping and service trucks that are occasionally there. And if 2 cars are coming at the same time, you have to wait. So this is a very narrow street. It gets a lot of pedestrians. And that's the most crucial piece for us, that not cut through. And I think Mr. Sandman and his team have done a good job of listening to our concerns, highlighting our concerns, communicating with us in the process. So we support the proposal so long as the conditions are met, and especially the condition that Chatterson not cut through to Honeycutt. That's crucial to us. The other thing I would say is the multi-use path as it connects to Honeycutt. I think it does make sense to have a walkway, like a striped pathway for pedestrians to be able to access Lafayette Village. And that's because it's a couple hundred yards to go down to the corner at Falls Neuse and cross. And I think as a practical matter, people are just going to cut across, whether there's safety provisions there or not. So I think a striped path, maybe with flashing yellow lights, maybe not, but just an opportunity. Further along on Honeycutt, there is a striped path that connects the Greenway, crossing Honeycutt, also in a 45 zone. And in fact, at a higher speed zone than at this close edge to the intersection. So I think that makes sense. So we have had over 30 neighbors in the public comment portal voice these concerns and our priorities. And as Attorney Birch mentioned, there were over 100 people at the first neighborhood meeting. Everyone was opposed to Chatterson cutting through to Honeycutt. Another thing that's important, and Mr. Salmon has assured us that the water runoff will be handled properly because we get a lot of water runoff in our neighborhood. And he's assured us that he's going to comply with all the regulations and have a runoff pond and properly distribute the water so our neighbors nearby the project don't have additional water problems. There's already water problems. So that's a very important piece of the process for us as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak in support of this project? Then moving on to public comment for those in opposition. Those opposed to this case have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Please come to the podium and introduce yourself. Seeing none, we can bring it to table discussion. Does anyone want to kick us off? Commissioner Fox.
My primary concern about the block perimeter exemption, it sounds like that's being addressed with the condition that's being drafted regarding the addition of a 10-foot multi-use path. My other concerns about tree conservation and open area, it sounds like are also addressed with these draft conditions that we're not looking at today. The last thing I'll add is I'm concerned a little bit about the pedestrians crossing Honeycutt. I was wondering if I could have staff answer a question. Just is that something that would be addressed during site plan review?
Good morning, Commission. Carter Robertson with Transportation. We do have our development review team aware of this case, so they'll be ready when site plan comes. As the applicant mentioned, we are ongoing conversation with NCDOT. Our Vision Zero team in particular is meeting with them on Thursday to talk about what would be appropriate for crossing Honeycutt. Ultimately, it's an NCDOT road. They have their own standards for when a crossing would be applicable, but without some sort of crossing or filling in the sidewalk gaps, there's really no way for people to get from the site to Lafayette Village right now.
Thank you. And you said that conversation is next week?
This Thursday,
this Thursday?
we're
Okay.
meeting with DOT.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions from commissioners? Yes, Vice Chair Bennett.
Thank you. I generally don't like conditions that prohibit apartments. I like that this is opening up the townhouse type, but unless there's a very compelling reason, I usually have concerns when we're prohibiting apartments. So would the applicant like to speak about why apartments are prohibited?
Yes, Commissioner Bennett, we primarily prohibited the apartment building type, one, because of our adjacency to single-family detached, and more primarily because of the future land use map and Falls watershed area plan guidance for kind of the lower scale building types. So those two things drove our decision to add that condition.
Okay, thank you.
Other comments from commissioners or questions? Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. I have taken seriously the concerns from staff in the report regarding this kind of development in the Falls Lake watershed, and I was wondering if we could get them to talk a little bit more about the kind of precedent that might be set and what kind of previous development of this type has gone on in the watershed, and also what kind of protections the watershed overlay provides that would not be required without it.
Good morning, councilors, our commission. Ed Buchan, Raleigh Water.
I'll speak at least to the precedent point that you brought up, and this is one that we have raised in other similar cases that we've brought before the commission previously. And it's a little bit of an esoteric description, but just bear with me. We are in the process of evaluating future water supply options, and one of those, which has been an option on the table for us since the early 90s, is the Little River Reservoir. And when that reservoir was identified, Wake County acted as Raleigh's proxy and acquired the property for that reservoir, and we've also opted as a utility not to extend services into the Little River Reservoir. And that has been generally our policy in any water supply watershed. So that's Falls, that's Swift Creek, and that's also Little River. So we try to treat all those water supply watersheds the same. And there are exceptions, and there are some in the Falls Lake watershed where there's been a failure of a septic system or a well system. That's usually when we would extend those services. So we felt like in those rare cases, that was going to be acceptable. But the issue is that if we set a standard, a policy, or a precedent of extending these services into the water supply watershed of Falls or any of our water supply watersheds, then that could threaten our ability to get a permit to build the Little River Reservoir. Little River Reservoir is a little bit different than the rest of the reservoirs. First of all, it doesn't exist yet. Secondly, it's a WS2, which is a very high classification for a water supply watershed in this area. By contrast, Falls Lake is a WS4. And then there's also endangered species in the Little River Reservoir. So the idea being that we're trying to protect the Little River Reservoir as much as we can, so that once we enter into a discussion with the permitting agencies, we can point to that and say, we have not extended services in the Little River Reservoir to help preserve these species you've identified. And our concern would be that if we set a precedent, we start to extend those services into those areas, then we'll no longer have that ability to make that argument.
Could you expand a little bit on what a WS2 means compared to a WS1?
It's a state designation for water supply watersheds, and it restricts. The lower the number, the more restrictive it is in terms of development, impervious surface, and density. All of these things impact what a water supply classification is. So WS4 is the least restrictive, and a WS2 is getting close to 1. So 1 is generally the only one you would see in the mountains, trout waters, and things like that. Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could
Would you
just
like to respond?
address that question as well. I think it's important to note, kind of north of Strickland, west of Falls, south of 540 is what's called the secondary watershed, the secondary part of the Falls watershed. North of 540 is the primary, where the restrictions on impervious are much greater. Also want to note that utilities are at the site. We have a sewer connection, and it's not following my finger for some reason. We have a sewer connection with an easement where we can directly connect in the northwest corner, and there is water in Honeycutt. So this isn't a situation where we are kind of truly extending utilities out into a greenfield area, into the watershed, an area of the watershed where they don't already exist. All of Bentry is annexed within the city limits, served by water sewer. The church to our north, in the city limits, served by water sewer. The commercial on the north side of Falls, which is in the watershed, served by water sewer within the corporate limits. This is really a donut hole, one of the few pieces within the secondary, well, I'll just say in this area south of 540 that has not been annexed and is not yet connected to utilities. But this is not a situation where we need to actually extend mains to like serve a property that's a distance away from where utilities exist today. Also want to just provide the commission with a little history of 2 or 3 rezoning cases that y'all have seen within the last 3 to 4 years, as you're aware. And I think these are situations similar to this property. One off Leesville Road next to the Harris Teeter Shopping Center. You've seen that one twice, both for requests for density in excess of 1 unit per acre. Certainly the one most recently for, I believe, about 10 units per acre on that site. And again, utilities were stubbed to that site, but that's also secondary watershed area north of Strickland. The other was off of Six Forks Road, Lead Mine Road. It was a portion of the church property, kind of right there, you see off of Six Forks on your left-hand side, where we rezoned just over 7 acres for 40 units, townhomes, and that came out to about 5.4 units per acre. Again, similar situation here, secondary utilities to the site. And so, listen, we want to certainly not interfere with Raleigh's permitting process for the Little River, but as you heard, that WS2 classification is much different than the WS4 in Falls. That's a major distinction, right, where there are less restrictive things being imposed. I also want to note, we are not changing the Falls Watershed Protection Overlay District. That's being maintained. The 30% impervious surface is remaining. It's a matter of what we're doing within that 30%. Thanks.
Thank you. Other questions from our commissioners? Or comments? Seeing none, it sounds like the applicant has already submitted draft conditions to staff, and there have not been a discussion of any additional draft conditions today at the table. So I would like to, so if we were to defer this item to our next case, that would be on March 11th. And that means that I guess the draft conditions are already in, so we would just need to receive signatures by the deadline to receive it in that case. Is that amenable to the applicant to defer that to March 11th?
Yes, it is, and that also gives us time to hear the results of the meeting on Thursday. I just want to acknowledge, we've been very clear with transportation that we understand the practical realities of people crossing Honeycutt to get to Lafayette or Lifetime. And we don't want to put our future residents in danger of crossing, or Bentry or anybody else. And so you have an applicant who is willing to do what we can, subject to NCDOT approval for that crossing.
Thank you. So that's a good note. If the outcome of that meeting on Thursday presents an opportunity for the applicant to provide additional conditions, I believe those would need to be submitted by this Friday. Would that provide you enough time?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, Commissioner Haber.
I know DOT is its own animal, but would it help if the applicant, since they're willing to provide a crossing, would it help if the Planning Commission made a stand that we would support that for the applicant to be able to take that DOT out? It probably won't help, to be honest with you. I don't know that it would impact DOT. You might be able to speak to that, but just curious, because it does seem like it could very well be an issue right there. And I know what DOT requirements are. I think they're generally going to come out of the gate and say, we're not going to do a crossing there, so.
Okay. Commissioner Fox, did you have feedback?
I don't know if a condition can compel another agency to take action, so I'm less inclined to do that, but I will be interested in the feedback to see if there are some elements that we could include or some further recommendation to City Council regarding some other capital project.
Thank you. I agree. I think the fact that we had this conversation gives the applicant something to take to DOT.
Would it be helpful to have DOT attend the next meeting, a representative on this item? Or could we just get the information back from transportation staff on this? Maybe that's a question for staff. Probably just a question.
Yeah, we'd be happy to provide an update to you all and the applicant. We'll also talk with them and gauge interest if they'd like to come.
Thank you very much. Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Thank you, Chair Miller. With the chair's approval, I'd like to request that staff have the stormwater attend the next meeting. I'd like to hear more about the overlay district and the requirements for impervious surface.
Okay. So it sounds like we're going to defer this case to March 11th and awaiting with the inclusion of at least 3 new conditions, potentially a 4th related to transportation, and an update from transportation staff and from in the attendance of stormwater staff additionally, so we can ask some additional questions. Are there any questions in particular that stormwater or the applicant might consider related to stormwater that you want to forecast for the next meeting?
I am not qualified
Okay.
to, especially at this time with my ignorance of the regulations around the overlay district, to ask for anything specific. I'm just interested in learning more about the overlay district and how it interacts with the request at this point.
Thank you. Okay. Then in that case, I'll make a motion to defer this case until our March 11th meeting. Do I have a second? Motion is second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thanks very much. We'll see you in 2 weeks. Okay. Moving on to our next item, agenda item D3, rezoning case Z5324, the Top Green Community Center. This case is to change approximately 1.32 acres from R10 with NCOD to R10. And we will now turn to Robert Tate for a presentation from City Planning staff.
Good morning again, Commission. Robert Tate, Planning and Development, rezoning request Z5324. This is for the John P. Top Green Community Center. It's a request to rezone 1.32 acres from R10 with the NCOD and requesting to remove that NCOD, keeping that R10 designation. And I want to kind of briefly discuss the project that kind of facilitated and initiated this request. The purpose for the rezoning is to facilitate the expansion and renovation of the existing park site. The request appeared at RHDC's February 12th meeting. This was triggered because the site and the parcels within the park site are within the South Park and East Raleigh National Register Historic District. And the results from that meeting, they recommended approval with a vote of 8-0 with 1 abstaining. So just a reminder, your request or your deadline for action is April 26th. So here's a look at the site. So largely moderate scale residential surrounds the site. This is just east of downtown and just west of Chavis Park. Also, you'll see Shaw University just to the west as well, and across Southeast Street is a Duke Energy substation. So just a high-level look and a zoomed-out look of the South Park NCOD. So this site falls relatively to the north of the boundary area. So a couple of the dimensional standards have kind of prohibited and provided a hindrance to the park project. So that's why you're seeing this request before you today. And I'll note that it's the A through D requirements of the NCOD that have been providing that hindrance. So because this request is general use, there are no conditions provided on the city-owned property. So not a substantial change in entitlement. The residential entitlement should stay relatively the same unless utilizing the frequent transit development option. So this site has a higher walk score, transit score, and bike score just because of its proximity to downtown and many different services, has a higher transportation cost and higher job proximity. Here's a look at transit within the area. This site is served by Route 20 and Route 19 and is roughly a half mile south of the Go Raleigh station. This would add to the housing supply if the frequent transit development option is ever utilized, which is not the intent for the site, but would unlock that entitlement. This does not include subsidized units, would continue to permit a variety of housing types, smaller units, and smaller lots than the citywide average, and again, within walking distance of transit. This request is consistent with the future land use map designation of moderate scale residential and is consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. Here are a list of policies and just one inconsistent policy related to response time standards. So your deadline for action again is April 26th. I wish I had a little bit more to talk about for you all, but it's relatively a simple request. We also have park staff here today to provide maybe a little additional visibility of the project for your awareness, and they're available.
Thank you very much. Since the city is the applicant in this case, we'll move on to public comment for those in support. If park staff or any other members of the public would like to speak in support, you have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning. My name's Lauren Reed. I'm a capital project supervisor with Parks and Recreation, and I'll just give you a quick overview of the project just for fun. This is the John Top Green. We are changing the name to the African American Cultural Center from Community Center, and this is not associated with the bond project that I'm describing. It is just an associated change related to a change in goals and use of the center. The project scope is the renovation of the existing community center. We're going to have an expansion that comes in the form of a new multi-purpose building. There are going to be site stormwater improvements. We're going to expand the exhibits, the historic exhibits within the facility, and add a recording studio with the intention of recording histories from the neighborhood, from the area, and other items. And this is going to serve as a trailhead to the South Park Heritage Trail, which is another bond project, and that they are working in conjunction. The project budget is a little bit over $9 million, and we have a public artist that was chosen for the project. Just a quick development of the design. The designers started with the current conditions. They took influence from the NC State and SPRNA proposal done in 2014. We had multiple, pretty extensive community outreach with public engagements and a CAG. It was a joint CAG with the other projects being for the Chavis Community or Chavis Aquatic Center and the South Park Heritage Trail. After multiple iterations and presentations, we landed in an additional building shown on the right. Some of the features in rendering, we're going to have a little amphitheater out back that will overlook the stormwater improvement area, and the community building itself. The design was taken from influence from the new construction in the area, but also from the historic front porches. And we have a layout with the studio exhibits, a little bit of tweaking and renovation in the existing building, and then we'll be adding a large community room, screen and porch covered. We'll have exterior facing and interior facing restrooms. The exterior facing will serve the South Park Heritage Trailhead that is located in between the two buildings. On the right-hand side, you can see, for reference, there are currently 6 parcels making up this park property, and we need to recombine them. Just for reference, this is a separate project, but I would like to point out that this is the current layout for the South Park Heritage Trail, and the yellow star is where the Top Green Center is. The estimated schedule design is going through early 2026. Construction will start towards the end of 2026 and complete about the end of 2027. And if you had any questions, I can answer them.
Thank you very much. Are there any other members of the public who'd like to speak in support of this project? And moving on to public comment for those in opposition. Those opposed have a total of 10 minutes to speak. Seeing none, we can bring it back to the table. Any thoughts from our commissioners? Yes, Commissioner Haver.
Not specifically to this project, but you mentioned the Heritage Trail. I'm just curious if there are conversations going on with other parts of the city about the amphitheater location. That was a big concern with the amphitheater, relocating it. How was it going to affect the Heritage Trail? There was lots of conversations, around that. So I assume we're sort of crossing the divide there, talking about that.
So the South Park Heritage Trail itself does not actually go to where the Red Hat Amphitheater is. That part is the strollway. It's actually, so that's two different associated but different projects that have a little bit of overlap. So this is the historic trail on our side. I do know that there have been conversations and some adjustments with the strollway path due to the amphitheater location, though.
Thank you. Other questions? Commissioner Fox.
I have just a question for staff. I don't know if anyone can answer this at this point, but are there a lot of instances where an NCOD is on top of a city facility?
I'm not sure about that.
It's a weird thing. Yeah.
I know there are some civic uses in schools that are in NCODs, but I'm not sure about the number or which NCODs that they apply to.
Okay. I'm just acknowledging it's challenging for a civic use to meet the requirements of an NCOD. And I know the NCOD topic is one that we had in strategic planning. So at the end of the meeting, I might come back to this point. But thank you. I see no reason to hold this one up. I don't find it inconsistent. I understand exactly what they're doing, so I'm ready to support it at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Any further comments? I'll entertain a motion. Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
All right. Regarding Z5324, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated February 25th, 2025, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously, 6-0. Thank you. Excuse me. Moving on to our next agenda item D4, text change TC 824 with the townhouse building type clarifications. This text change is to amend the UDO to clarify the existing townhouse building type description. And I'll turn to Justin Rometta for a presentation from city planning staff.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. Justin Rometta with Planning and Development. This is TC 824. It is what I hope is a relatively straightforward text amendment to the UDO for you all this morning. I'd like to start by saying that there is no proposed policy change with this text change. Its sole purpose is really to clarify what has been existing practice and policy since the UDO was adopted, and so has been in place for the past 11-ish years. So no policy change, really just clarifying language to recognize mainly the different ownership structures that are potentially used in townhome developments, which I'll go into a bit more detail on. Before doing that, I did just want to mention, though, briefly that the text change does amend how the UDO defines the term townhome, but does not affect in any way how they are reviewed or treated under the building code. So those two primary ownership structures that we're talking about, the first is the fee simple model, where an individual property owner might own the land as well as the unit that sits on top of that land. And each unit sits on its own subdivided lot. It can be sold or transferred independent from any other unit or lot within the development. Contrast that with a condo setup or potentially an apartment, a lease setup, where all or multiple units are placed on a single lot, typically an HOA or some other property owner owns the land underneath, but different individuals may own within the walls of their dwelling unit, or those units might be owned as a whole and leased to individuals as well. So the existing definition of the townhome building type is on the screen here. It is, if I can draw this, nope, not drawing where I want it to draw. That sentence starting with units may be placed on an individual lots, or the entire building may be placed on a single lot. That is what is proposed to be changed. Given the singular nature of the word building, there has been some question or clarification needed as to whether more than one unit may be placed on a lot. And again, that is the only goal of this text change, is to make very clear that whether or not the individual units sit on their own lot or whether multiple units sit on one lot, either is acceptable from a form perspective. They look the same on the street. These differences really only exist on paper, and therefore we want to treat them the same from the zoning code standpoint. And so here's the proposed definition. You can see the strike-through language, the entire building being removed, and that clarifying language that one or more units, building types may be placed on a single lot. So hope that makes sense. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thanks very much. We'll now open it up to public comment. For anyone in support, you have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we will open up to public comment for anyone in opposition. You have a total of 10 minutes to speak. And seeing none, we'll bring it back to the table. Any thoughts?
Question. In regards to a comment Commissioner Bennett made earlier on the agenda with a case limiting apartment type buildings, I just want to be clear. So technically, you could have a building where you're renting units, and if they have vertical demising walls, they could still be called a townhouse.
That's correct.
Okay. You're welcome. But other than that, this is very clear, and it's actually very helpful.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I'll entertain a motion. Yes, Commissioner Otwell.
Here we go, on a roll today. All right, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated February 25th, 2025, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Vice Chair Bennett is seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously 6-0. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Moving on to approval of the minutes. We have one batch of minutes from our last meeting on February 11th. Any comments to the minutes? Then seeing none, I will make a motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second? Oh, Commissioner Lampman has seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thanks very much. Moving on to other business, report of the chair. Just one item today. Commissioner Dean Rains is not here today, but it's my understanding that today is his last meeting on our member roster, and we will have a new appointee filling his vacancy in March. I am very excited to welcome her to the team. But I also just wanted to say a few words about Commissioner Rains. He's been an incredibly valuable member of this commission, and I'm sorry that he's not here to say goodbye in person. I think it was just a last-minute scheduling change. But it's been an honor to rely on him as a fellow commissioner, as my vice chair, to rely on him for his technical expertise, his experienced wisdom, and also just his professional friendship. He's been a joy to work with. And I know public service is a calling, and I sincerely thank him for his tireless and dedicated service to the city for nearly half a decade, and wish him all of the best and look forward to seeing him, who knows, potentially as an applicant in the future. So with that, I'll move it down the line.
Thank you. It looks like there are no items on the agenda for Committee of the Whole for March. So I am assuming there will be no committee of the whole meeting for March.
Great.
We don't have a February committee of the whole meeting, and looks well like we don't have one for March also. So, and no further report.
Thank you.
No report. Thank you.
Text change committee got snowed out last week. So next March 19th, Wednesday at 4 p.m. in One Exchange Plaza, we will pick up the conversation of considering how garage space interacts with the maximum requirement for square footage for the cottage home development type. And I've also had a member of the public reach out to me about wanting to come speak to the text change committee. They were concerned about what's going on. Is it where the developer is suing the neighborhood to remove conditions to facilitate some townhome development? I can't remember the name of the neighborhood over near Imicon. And I think it's a pretty salient issue, but I'm not sure text change is the best place for that kind of discussion. I thought it might be better to come to the committee of the whole or strategic planning. And I wanted to get the commission's feedback and the chair's feedback about maybe recommending to this person that they change their target.
Good point. I don't know enough about the case and the issue at this time. Do other commissioners have thoughts or more familiar with this issue? They're also always welcome to speak at the Planning Commission at the beginning for comments from a member of the public, and perhaps at that time, when we know more details, we might be able to direct them to the right place.
I'll bring that up with them. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Fox.
Hello. Talking about Strategic Planning Committee, I know we've had an item in committee for a number of months. The last time we discussed it was in October. It's related to neighborhood conservation overlay districts. Part of the delay has been trying to fully understand some recent changes to state law regarding the ability to downzone a property. That was one of the discussion items we discussed at committee. My question, perhaps to our parliamentarians, would I be able to report out a portion of the committee findings, even though we've not met or made a formal motion at the committee since October?
You'd need you'd need a formal motion to make a report like that, but people can decide whether they're going to take it up on the next agenda anyway.
So am I hearing, if I made a motion to hear the report of the committee here and the committee members are present and vote, we would be able to at least hear part of that report? Is that correct?
I think, yeah, it can be heard without, recommendation.
Okay. Motion to hear the report of the Strategic Planning Committee?
Second?
All in favor?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Okay. There were a number of topics we discussed, and it was in regards to a couple of cases removing NCODs or changing NCODs that are existing. After a significant amount of research and presentation by staff, I think part of these issues can be resolved fairly easily, which is the committee is recommending council consider some changes to alter how NCODs are changed. So that means an existing NCOD at a time at which some member within that NCOD chooses to change some parameter of it, that they would have to go through a process that's similar in nature to how the NCOD was formed. I believe there are some other outstanding issues, and perhaps we might want to consider how civic buildings are considered in NCODs, because it seems to be a recurring issue. But I'll just report out that one issue, if people are in support, in sending some message or report to council regarding changing existing NCODs and requiring them to go through a process that is similar to the formation of an NCOD, where members of that NCOD, so people with property within that confines, need to vote on it.
That's dealing with the case that came before us a few months ago. It's not when an applicant comes in from outside the NCOD. Got it. I'm in support of that.
We've actually seen, when we discussed this in committee, we've seen 2 cases in the past year where neighborhoods wanted to amend, some neighbors wanted to amend the NCOD as a whole, and they did not have a process for doing that, so they tried to undertake a private process for doing that, and that was very problematic and overall harmful to the neighborhood and to the neighbors. And so we identified that there was a need to provide the neighbors that kind of process. And that was one of the items that we discussed. So again, similar to how an NCOD is created, and the city provides a process for that, creating a new process to let the neighbors amend that in a way that is, of course, consistent with state law and our UDO. Otherwise.
If I remember, I think we were all a little incredulous when we first learned
Yes.
the process to amend versus the process to create, so makes sense.
Yes. Any further discussion on that item? Any other thoughts from other commissioners in favor of sending that recommendation from the Planning Commission, not the Strategic Planning Committee, but from the full Planning Commission to City Council? Thoughts? Commissioner Otwell, any thoughts? In favor?
He's on board.
I think it sounds great.
Okay, great. Then, do we make a motion to make a recommendation to council? Yes,
I believe so.
Please.
So moved. We'd like to make a recommendation to council to consider changes to the UDO to alter the process by which existing NCODs are changed wholesale.
So I guess one thing I would say is this action wasn't on today's agenda.
This is true.
So you might put that on the next agenda.
Okay.
So can we include it under committee reports, or?
Yeah, I think it'd be like an information item, and then put an action on the next item, and then if the whole group votes to approve the agenda, then it's like approving, hearing the action item next time.
So rescind the motion. Can I make a
Well,
motion
one other
to
thought,
put us
should
on
we,
committee?
instead of making it a committee report, could we perhaps put it on consent? And then, so it's more of a recommendation of the commission to put it on consent as opposed to a recommendation of the committee? And then the public will have notice of it, and we can, obviously, I'll make sure we have time to discuss that, and any member of the public could want to discuss that item on consent as well.
Recommendation to put on consent.
Yes, thank you. Without objection, I would like to include on our next meeting agenda an item under consent, the consent agenda, to discuss a recommendation to council regarding creating a new process to amend an NCOD that is similar to the same process as creating an NCOD. Thank you. Yes.
If it's on consent and people want to comment, they can still comment on it?
Yes, I will
Okay.
make sure that there's
Okay.
an opportunity for that. I was just trying to figure
Okay.
where to fit it
So I'm
in.
just thinking people see NCOD,
Yes,
they're gonna-
and I very much welcome public comment
so, okay.
on this item.
Okay.
Thank you. Other comments from, yes, from Commissioner Fox?
With that motion and the potential reporting out at our next full Planning Commission meeting, I do not believe we need to hold the March 12th Strategic Planning Committee meeting.
Okay, great. Moving down the line.
No comments from me. I enjoyed serving with you all. Thank
Oh,
you.
today is your last meeting as
Yeah.
well. Oh,
I thought it was good. And I'm excited to see on the assistant director comments that we may have. someone in. So that's
Commissioner
exciting.
Lampman, thank you. Please forgive me
And
for
for many times before.
this is, it has been an honor to work with you. I'm so glad that you are here at your last meeting.
Quorum.
We're dropping like flies. Yes. Left and right. It has been such a joy, and your experience in affordable housing has been so critical and helpful in this whole process, and your collegiality has been, you've been a treasure, and we will miss you, and we wish you the very best of luck. Thank you so much, and we wish you just the very best, and look forward to seeing you soon. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, moving on to report of the Assistant Director.
Sure, I just want to highlight in what is included in the agenda backup, some information about the new Planning Commission member, Jessica Cochran, who will start on the March 11th, your next meeting. And then I didn't want to make a correction in the information about our outgoing Planning Commission members. Dean Rain's service did start in March of 2021, not 2023.
Yes, thank you. Any other items for the good of the Planning Commission? Then with that, with a heavy heart, saying goodbye to two of our members, we are adjourned.